Dobré odpoledne, vítáme vás na další přednášce z našeho cyklu Věda kontra iracionalita. Tentokrát tady máme speciálního hosta až z Austrálie. A ne, neplatí nás ilumináti, ale on už v Evropě byl, tak jsme ho vzali, ať přijde sem, když už teda je na našem kontinentě. A bude nám přednášet o popularizaci vědy ze své zkušenosti jako prezident Australské asociace popularizátorů vědy. Takže tady máme Toma Carruthersa. So, welcome everyone. This afternoon we are going to have another lecture from our cycle, Science Contra Irrationality. And we have a very special speaker today all the way from Australia. No, we are not being paid by the Illuminati. He was already in Europe, so we asked him to come and give us a talk if he's already on our continent. So he will be talking about his specialty, which is science communication, from his point of his expertise as being the co-president of the Australian Science Communicators. So give him a warm welcome.
All right. Am I using the right microphone? Can you all hear me? And please do interrupt. I want to be very clear. If there's anything that I say that is too fast, or if I use language that's not appropriate, please interrupt and let me know. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you here today. It's a pleasure to come and talk to you and to come to this particular venue. One of the things I used to do is work at the Australian Academy of Science in the communications team there. And that's a little bit of a different structure to how I understand that this academy works. But it is such an honour to be in a space like this. So thank you so much, Claire. Thank you to all, both online and here in the room, for coming along. This is where I'm from. It is customary in Australia for us to acknowledge the lands that you work on, that you live on, that you play on, or that you might be engaging in some sort of meeting. This is literally only 2 minutes drive, 5 minutes drive away from our capital Parliament building, our national Parliament. I don't know of another place in the world where the Parliament House is in country like this. This region is known as Canberra and sometimes referred to as the bush capital. Canberra is the modern name for the area. The name in the Aboriginal language and for the Aboriginal family who were there is Ngunnawal land. And so I acknowledge that I have had the amazing privilege of living and working on Ngunnawal land. And this is the kind of place that is on offer. Come visit, say hello. A little bit about me. Thank you for the introduction, Claire. I am the co-president of the Australian Science Communicators. I sit... Yes?
It's more later, actually. Now isn't going both here and here.
Oh, okay.
That's enough.
That's enough? Yeah. Fantastic. I am the co-president of the Australian Science Communicators. I am on the preparatory committee for the World Organization of Science Literacy. That organization is headquartered in China. I used to work at the Australian Academy of Science, specifically leading up how we go about communicating our scientific understanding to the various audiences we spoke with. And I also used to lead Pint of Science Australia. I don't know how many of you know of Pint of Science here in Europe. I know that it's quite popular in several countries. A dear friend of mine, Jorana Buntanjai, and I co-led that in Australia. I also, most recently, was a PR, so happy to chat later about that. This is my talk, which we'll see how far we get through in the amount of time. I'm happy to skip across a few things. The key point that I'm wanting to make here is to give you an introduction to the field as I see it, and share how young we are as a field and some of the problems and the challenges we have because of that youth. And then there's some specific ideas around how we can take the best from science communication to be able to engage an audience or work collaboratively with people, policymakers, whoever we might speak to. So, fundamentally, what is science communication? This is a joke that I did at the talk that Claire saw, and that's why she invited me to come along. It's not about yelling at people until they listen to you. Definitely not. That we know doesn't work. Science communication is understanding that those kinds of practices haven't worked and striving to understand better what kind of practices do work to be able to get a message across and to communicate with an audience. I would love to give you a really clear and succinct definition of what science communication is. But most recently, there was a survey of all the different countries that do science communication, and every single country had a different definition that was drastically different. So we as a field still have a bit of a way to go to try and understand or properly define what is and what isn't science communication. For me, science communication has a huge aspect of making scientific content that is quite often very complex, more accessible. And it aids people being able to make informed decisions. It aids ideas of democracy and so on and so forth. It's about creating an accessible information bank. It probably goes further than that. And one of the fundamental things that is in modern science communication is that it is a research field as well. So people actively research how science is being communicated so that we can then learn how to do it better next time. This is a particular area where Australia is very strong. There is the Australian National Centre for the Public Awareness of Science. Big mouthful, we often just call them CPAS. They do specific research in how science is communicated on social media or through whatever means it might be communicated, and learn about how we can do it better. Good science communication does all of this without being wrong. That's very much my perspective. More important than being right is that you make sure that you're not wrong. When you are wrong, you can start to form misconceptions in an audience. And so this is where the difference between oversimplifying something or making sure it's accessible comes into play. So why do science communication? I wanted to just give a very quick example here that comes from my work that I was doing at the Australian Academy. The research is incredibly important. In Australia, we have a fairly large migrant community that don't all have a fantastic grasp of the English language. We have we only speak English predominantly in terms of our government organisations in Australia. So that means that there is a barrier. We know people quite often use fantastic tools like I've been using here this trip. Google Translate's fantastic at being able to just take a photo of something and see how it works. Science communication research helps us understand how your pieces might be communicated in other languages. And the recent pandemic came up as being something that this was pretty important for, but also we had issues with meningococcal a little bit before that, where we knew now from the science communication research that using the word immunisation, when it's translated into Arabic languages, it more accurately translates into the immunity you have after you've had the disease, rather than getting a vaccine, right? And so by simply changing the words you use, you're able to avoid a miscommunication. So if you say, have you had a vaccine yet? You know that you're getting that across even though it's being translated into other languages. And that's kind of the benefit of where science communication research comes in. So facts matter. I was speaking before about how I feel as though it's important to not get things wrong. But is that the only thing that matters? There is a concept in science communication where I am up here, I have the knowledge, I am talking to you. You don't have the knowledge. I am giving you this knowledge because you want it, maybe. I mean, you came here, so hopefully, yes, you did. But there's an idea that you are there ready to accept this gift I'm giving you. Sometimes in science communication, we refer to this as an empty vessel. It's a cup ready to be filled with stuff that you might be teaching someone in a school. Or it's known as the deficit model, which is that there is a deficit of knowledge on one side, and the person who has the knowledge fills that deficit or lack of knowledge on the other side. This model is being used whenever we hear arguments such as we need more physics teaching in school, or if more people knew more biology, we wouldn't have so much issue trying to communicate about vaccines or whatever. Or I'm going to record a lecture about my research because people definitely want to see it. And once they see my lecture, they're going to make better decisions. These all are kind of like this concept that you're ready to take this. And in some cases it works. And I hope that, at least for some of you, this does work because I'm actually engaging right now in this deficit model. I'm telling you something and asking for you to take what I say, right? But it doesn't always work. Sometimes when you are offering information, it might be coming too fast, too hard at the wrong time. And so the information comes in and it bounces right out because you're actually more worried about whether or not you're going to miss your train on the way home. It could be that there are other ideas that your audience already have that conflicts with the new information that's coming to them. If you fundamentally believe that 2 + 2 = 4, and I come in and tell you, no, it actually equals 5, it doesn't matter how good I argue that, you're going to dismiss everything I say because it doesn't match your worldview beforehand. Or it could just be completely out of reach for you. It could be completely inaccessible. Maybe I'm speaking too fast in a language that isn't yours. Or maybe I am talking in a building that is hard for someone with a wheelchair to get up to, or whatever it might be. It might be, or even just talking about science without thinking about how I'm communicating to my audience. That accessibility might be the issue. There are several reasons why, but in general, the deficit model of science communication is largely seen as not being the most effective or valuable way of doing communication of science anymore. What we end up with by continually increasing our level of science training that we do in schools or whatever is a risk of a community that think and misunderstand or misrepresent to themselves their own understanding of key scientific terms. And I would challenge you to look at any piece of, any document of misinformation that doesn't start off with very early on there being some sort of core truth that you could verify with using year 8 science, like training when you're about 13. Most of these things do come in that sense. You start with something that you have been taught in school, and then it progressively gets higher education before it turns into something which is disinformation. We don't know what we don't know. And I think it's one of the most fundamental things that I learned in my PhD was just how little I do know. And that is actually a way that I'm hopefully inoculating myself, protecting myself from falling into this trap. So I started off this little section by saying that facts were important. And like the question is, well, if we're saying that the deficit model's not telling you facts or telling you things, well, do they work at all? Are they important at all? I would challenge you to think about a single person that you know, be it yourself, be it someone else, who smokes at the moment, and check whether or not you think they believe, honestly, that smoking equals cancer. Smoking does lead to cancer. telling them that smoking causes cancer isn't going to stop you from smoking. Like, that's not the thing that changes here. And we know this from the Australian context, an example where the campaigns that were out to try and reduce the amount of smoking in the population stopped just telling people that they would get cancer. It started dealing with what the community of smoking was. It shifted where if you were having a smoke, you weren't doing that in a restaurant or a cafe anymore. You had to go outside to do so, and so on. And that was actually a whole lot more effective in that sense. So, do facts work to like convince an audience? They'll probably say no. Emotion might. But fundamentally, facts are super important not to get wrong. And there was something I was going to do with this slide, but I've forgotten, so I'm going to skip ahead. But there's a sheep, and there's like 2 + 2 = 5, so that's a nice little hook back to my earlier comment. So don't be wrong. I didn't say this earlier, Claire, but Claire was telling me earlier today how she puts in fluffy animals and things like that into her talks because it makes people happy. I decided to quickly add in a couple of Australian animals. This is a tawny frogmouth. It's quite often misunderstood to be an owl. It's actually not an owl at all. But it's a cool Australian animal and looks like a branch. Good. So don't be wrong. And the reason why you don't want to be wrong is because you don't want to completely ruin your own campaign, the thing you're actually already talking about. So fortunately, this was actually a lot harder to find than it was a year and a half ago when I did a Google image search. Something that we really worked hard at the Australian Academy of Science was to, when we were talking about vaccines, that we were not saying that vaccines were safe. This is an issue that the WHO did do this, right? And for the vast majority of people, I want to be very upfront, vaccines are safe for the vast majority of people. Millions and millions of people have absolutely no issue with it. It's only in a very, very rare case that it is a problem. But there is that rare case. And so if you are an authority and you come out and say that vaccines are safe, and then there is a story that disproves you, you've lost any credibility that you were relying on as being the big organisation, the World Health Organization, saying you should follow us and listen to us, you can trust us. Our language appropriately, and this is also fed by the science communication research that goes into how people respond to different marketing, different language. Our language at the Academy of Science was closer to this. We didn't say the short answer is yes. We said very. We would say that vaccination is the safest way to protect yourself. Now, even if there is 1 or 2 cases in 10 million people where that's really not true, it's still, the statement isn't disproved by that small case. And this is what I mean by not being wrong, right? Is that being right is to say that vaccines are safe, because to however many decimal places, this is the true answer. It is right. But it was wrong in a very, very small number of cases. This is actually not wrong, and in fact, kind of more right because of that. So I would argue that we really do need to focus on avoiding being wrong. It's a challenge though, it's very hard to do. Did I have any more that I wanted to say on that? No. So the next area I want to go into is around the purpose of why we communicate and why we talk. And I know that specifically for me, when I was learning first, I came from a science background and I went into science communication. The thing that drove me to do a show or to do something fun for schools was that I lived off the excitement and pleasure that a 3 or a 4-year-old might have when they get something for the first time. There's some trick that I've done that I then explain how it works, and then they're so proud to be able to go and tell other people how this thing works because they've learned something. that was how I started, and in the context of the education space and the outreach that I was doing, that was entirely appropriate. It makes sense. But if I'm going out and trying to do communications about something that's more relevant to a policymaker or a government official, wanting them to learn more science, well, they probably know enough, and they probably don't need to know right now. Their issue is actually much bigger than whether or not they fully understand Newton's third law or not. It's more important that the aircraft flies, not how it flies. And so I think this is quite often the biggest learning curve for a lot of people who especially come out of sciences and science communication, is to fundamentally understand their purpose of why they are communicating in the first place. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? What are you wanting the other side to take away or know? And when I am putting together a new campaign, I try and challenge myself with a couple of questions. These are a couple of the key ones. What is it that we want? Are we trying to get some sort of behaviour change that happens in a population? Are we trying to get some sort of action to happen that we want politicians to be able to fund research in a certain way, or whatever it might be? Understanding what that purpose is then helps you understand what the second question, who needs to be your audience? There is no point talking to grade 2s or like 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds about basic chemistry or science if the purpose is to shift policy change at Parliament House. So understanding your purpose helps define what audience you need to find. Once you've found out who that audience is, you can then figure out who is going to convey that information. Who is that audience going to listen to? There's no point putting someone in front of a group of people to hear something if there are barriers that get in the way. So don't put the chief executive of an oil company in front of a group of protesting Green supporters or environmentalist supporters, because it doesn't matter what that CEO of an oil company says. There is nothing that is going to get across to that group because there's already a barrier that already exists. Find who is going to be the spokesperson, the person who's actually going to present. And then once you also then know that, then you can start to work on what is actually going to be said. We quite often skip those first 3 steps. We worry about how we're going to talk about whatever it might be, or whatever it might be, right? And we forget that we need to understand why it is that we're actually engaging. Now, I do want to be very, very clear that the reason why we might be engaging doesn't necessarily have to be a teaching moment or a training moment. Excuse me. It could be actually about community building. The purpose of us having this chat here, am I going to change your behaviour in the way that you go about engaging stuff? I don't know, maybe, but I don't know. The thing that we're probably doing more effectively, though, is getting a bunch of people of similar mind into the same space and building a community, so it means that we then can access and talk to each other and solve problems together in the future. And if you approach it from that kind of purpose, then it doesn't matter what I say, Claire, I could just do a dance. We've actually brought ourselves together, but it then helps us figure out what that message could be that I'm giving you. A key example of that comes from my own experience with Pint of Science in Australia. I wanted to put this in here because I absolutely love the artwork that we had made up for this year. This is in 2018. Inside the pint glass, these are all references to the different talks that were as part of the actual festival. And so there's, I won't go through all of it, but it's a very, very Australian piece of artwork talking about Australian research, and I'm very excited by it. We started Pint of Science thinking that the people we were trying to talk to was the audience who was sitting in the venue, who would come along to a pub and listen to a scientist presenting. We ended Pint of Science with a completely different perspective of what our purpose was and what our goal was. And that was that we changed our primary audience, the group we were trying to engage, was the volunteers who were running these events. These were scientists who were very excited about running an event together. They didn't have very many skills in science communication or event management. And our role, we saw, was actually supporting them to be able to then do this. And by shifting our focus to actually where we could have impact, which was supporting the volunteers, the audience who came along the night ended up getting a better night anyway, because the event was run better. There was more risk management taken care of. People would turn up and the projector would actually work because they tested it the day before. And these kinds of ideas would come through. And so this is a key learning for me about constantly reminding me of what is the actual purpose, what is the thing that you're able to achieve, and then how can you focus your communication, your activity to be able to make impact. And I would also highly, highly recommend that while you need to keep on evaluating and measuring, you need to make sure that you don't measure the wrong thing. For people who work in social media, this is very easy to do. You can measure how many likes you get or how many video plays you might have. That's not your point, unless your point is to get those video plays. And it might be. You might want to have a huge number of video plays so you can go to a sponsor and say, hey, you should give us some money to be able to do a thing. Then your purpose was to get video plays. But if your purpose is to communicate a message, those video plays mean nothing unless they were long enough or valuable. So I'll leave that there in terms of purpose, and I think that it's an important thing for us to always keep in our mind that we need to have a reason for what we're doing. One of the purposes I think that helped define a lot of my work in science communication is to fundamentally think about who is going to best benefit from the work that I do or the communication that I make. And the PRs in the room will be talking about targeting, or social media managers will do the same. But I see that audience that needs support are the people who are the fence sitters, not the people who are far on the I believe the thing is true, or not the people who are far on the I believe the thing is not true. It's the people who are in the middle who have access or may not have access to both sides. And you, as a communicator, are potentially able to make more of an impact by providing that person with the resources that allow them to be able to make their own decision, build their own knowledge around whether a thing is true or not. And so this is going to who is your audience. I like to, again, these are just tricks that work for me. I like to imagine an individual who might be, let's come up with something completely hypothetical. Let's say this guy in the bottom right-hand corner is Uncle Jerry, and Uncle Jerry believes that I'm wearing a purple shirt today. Fundamentally, thoroughly it believes that I'm wearing a purple shirt today. My role as a communicator, if it's important to me that people don't think I'm wearing a purple shirt, my role as a communicator is to talk to the other people at that table and show them the shirt that I'm wearing under a different light, and for them to be able to make that call. I could try and convince Uncle Jerry, and maybe I could, but it depends on how long he's gone down that path. I'm probably going to be more effective at reducing the harm that Uncle Jerry could have by protecting those people who are in the surrounds of the person who is spreading this idea. And we did this specifically on social media around a number of key issues at the Australian Academy of Science. And we leaned into the algorithm to be able to make that job easier for us. So the first thing that we would have is, well, let's say we put up a post on the science of climate change. The people who already understand the science of climate change or value it and think it's true, they don't comment on the video. Why would they? It's just a piece of information they already know. The people who disagree with the video do comment. They're the ones who say, well, what is this? This is false. This is a load of lies, whatever it might be. I'm seeing that that person is the Uncle Jerry who believes my shirt is purple, right? The algorithm, at least on Facebook, prioritizes or recognizes that the piece of content that we put out on social media was relevant to the person who disagreed with that piece of content. It also then says the people that are closely related to that person, Uncle Jerry, probably also would be interested in this video as well. So Uncle Jerry, along with all of his mates who all decided that my shirt was purple, all see the video, but also all the people that Uncle Jerry speaks to at that table see the video as well. Great. We've now been able to get our video in front of the people that we were trying to target and try and get it in front of, right? But in fact, it's by letting Uncle Jerry comment that climate change is not true or that my shirt is purple, that actually helps bring that piece of content to the audience that I'm trying to get to. Now, the risk here, of course, is that if those extra people come and look at the content and they see that every single comment on here is all people who say, this is not true, then they go, well, hang on, maybe the Australian Academy of Science doesn't know what they're talking about. And so then we can also be clever about making sure that we encourage people to leave a comment on the video saying, actually, this is a great explanation of what it is, or, hey, John, you should see this, or whatever it might be. And so it then shifts that balance a little bit more and to be more favourable. This was actually a really, really hard concept to get across to the people who were my bosses at the time, to share what appeared as though we were putting out information that just kept on getting all these negative comments. But in fact, that we actually saw that as being a good thing because it helped us get the content to the actual audience we were trying to reach. So you can think about it sometimes in terms of how that targeting can come through. Again, who needs to hear your message? Who needs to tell your message? Sometimes it's the cousin of so-and-so who comments on the video is going to be the way of actually getting that through. All right, so then moving on to alienating audiences, which again, so we found our target, we know our purpose, we know what we're trying to reach. How do we make sure that they keep listening to us and they don't turn off or leave the room or swipe on if they're on a video call or on social media? These three images, at least, like the first two at least internationally, and the third one especially in Australia, all equal what? If you saw an ad on social media or something, what do you think I'm talking about? Climate change? There's research that's out there that actually shows that this shot of a polar bear floating on a piece of ice, you don't even have to have anything about climate change in your content. As soon as you have the polar bear on a piece of ice, people disengage. They don't want to look at it anymore. It's become such a trope for us to talk about, or a common way of us showing the impact of climate change, that in fact it's become so popular that people aren't interested and they disengage. This is a barrier that turns up. So it doesn't matter how good you are at talking or how much evidence you provide or how many facts you do, as soon as you put a photo of a polar bear at the top of your climate change article, the people who you're trying to convince, let's assume you're trying to convince the people who don't believe in climate change, the people just completely disengage, they don't listen anymore. They swipe on their social media. Australia, the one on the far right, specifically around the fires, bushfires, because that is one of our critical demonstrations of what climate change is. It's used quite often as another trope, as another overused example of the impact of climate change. So if you're wanting to, again, if your purpose is to try and reach an audience who might turn off because of these things, you need to consider how you're going to go about communicating that. So one of the examples that I wanted to put here was an article that I wrote around the variants of COVID-19 when I was working at the Academy. There were lots of people who wanted to understand what variants were. They were constantly seeking information. They wanted to find out how it worked. I knew that I didn't want to engage in a conversation about evolution, though. I could fundamentally say that variants exist because of the same reason why evolution exists. But if I write an article that starts talking about evolution, of this is how different things evolve into whatever, that turns off a portion of my audience. And that portion of the audience is a group that I want to still have engaged with me when I'm talking about COVID in another context. So this entire article goes through and explains how evolution works without using the word evolution once. Doesn't say the word evolve. Actually, now I'm not sure if it said evolve, but it definitely doesn't say the word evolution, right? And that was very, very deliberate. This is supposed to remind me about herd immunity. Yes, this is another one. Has anyone seen the documentary by Australian filmmaker Sonia Pemberton called Jabbed? Have you seen or heard Jabbed? No? It's a couple of years old now. But she is really, I really like her work because she uses a lot of science communication ideas to inform how she puts together her documentaries. She did focus groups and studies and partnered with a university to look at how to communicate about vaccination. And one of the tropes of vaccine communication is to use the word herd immunity. And through their focus groups, they literally watched the focus group, and as soon as the scientists said herd immunity, a third of the people who they were trying to reach disengaged from the film. You can still talk about the core concept of what you're trying to get across without just falling into some of these overused, well-used ideas. Create relationship. Think about what your audience is actually going to get out of a thing, and then create a product that is for them. There is research that's out there that can help inform you as to some of these ones that some of these ideas that people disengage with. But in general, if anything's really, really popular, then there's a good chance that it's already been overused. So words are important and powerful. Oh, by the way, this is a quokka. This is not a kangaroo, but it is about only this size. It's a tiny little marsupial that, similar to a kangaroo, has a little pouch. The babies are even cuter. Don't touch them, they carry salmonella. And they live on one little island off the west coast of Australia. So, words are powerful. Find the ones that keep your dialogue open. If you're wanting to engage someone and you're wanting to be talking to them about a concept that is uncomfortable for them, you need to make sure that that communication stays open. Community is key. Now, this is a photo for you, Claire, because I wanted to remind you. I mean, it's not so relevant today because today was a beautiful day here. But yesterday when I was freezing, I wanted to remind you that that's where we met and had a chat. So this is a jetty in Canberra, a beautiful sunny spot where you can have a beer and look at the lake, and it's great. This was at the 2022 National Convention in Australia for the Australian skeptics. And something that really, really struck me was how much community there was, how much people were excited to see each other and came and said hello or whatever. Risky part here for me to do in the room. How many people who are here have felt as though they were part of a community by engaging in skeptics or something like that? Did anyone find people that are like them, that believe them, that listen to them? You've always found, so you were on the outer. But
Sorry, I wasn't focused.
Oh yes, no, that's fine. No, sorry, it's fine. The community is something that we all experience, right? What happens if I told you tomorrow that skeptics was actually completely the wrong way of thinking about stuff? You're going to find that really hard for me to tell you that, yeah? And you're probably going to more readily dismiss me than it is you're going to dismiss your community that you're a part of. I don't know, maybe. We've been talking for a little bit over the last couple of days. We created relationship and community there, right? This is the same issue that we experience elsewhere. I took this photo in Frankfurt on the way over here. And it's the thing that it was thoroughly discussed in this documentary that I'm sure that most of you are familiar with. The people find friends, they find family, they are part of a crew. I mean, this guy found love. For anyone who happens to have not seen this documentary, it's from 2018, and it follows basically a convention on flat earthing in the US. And there's a bunch of people who do experiments to try and prove that the world is flat. And the experiments are fantastic. For the large part, they're really sound. The trouble is that they find out that actually the experiments prove that the world is not flat. And so then they have to go about improving the experiments so they get the answer that they're looking for. That's like the surface message that's there. The thing that's really core to it, though, is that for people to understand this new idea, break the idea that they already have, they have to dismiss the family that they've just established. They're out on their own again. They're alone again. And you're not consciously thinking about this, but it's a case of it can't be wrong because Uncle Jerry believes this. I think the quote from the director is Daniel said kind of goes to this point. My dream would be that when people watch this film, they take flat earthism as an analogy to something they believe in, because it is so easy to demonize another group or another person for something they think, but you're kind of just as guilty if you do that. We are all at risk of doing this. We're all at risk of just staying within our family bubble and sticking to it. And we need to be empathetic and considerate of the position that others are in when we're trying to engage, if we're trying to motivate behaviour change. Going back to if we're going for a purpose. If our purpose is to change the behaviour of the person we're speaking to and they're in this group, then you are effectively asking them to get rid of everyone they know and every friend they know. And if this side isn't more warm and welcoming and ready for them to feel as though they're actually at home, then they're not going to leap over. And as I said, this guy in the movie, you find out like he's so close to his love of his life, who comes from the other side of the country, and then they get to meet only at conferences. Do you want this guy to not see her ever again? That's what he's looking at if he decides to say, actually, you know what, I'm wrong. And unless we're offering him something as valuable as that, it's going to be very hard for us to convince him to shift. And this brings me into, the point that I was making with that is around community being really, really fundamentally important. Community is everything. And this shifts away from that deficit model where I'm telling you a fact that this isn't effective in dealing with the fact that I'm asking you to leave your tribe and come over to mine. Especially if when you come over to my tribe, you're going to be demonized for being over there in the first place. Or that you're going to take one step towards this way and you're going to be shunned by your own group, and we're going to shun you for not having come all the way yet. Like, it's a very, very, very difficult passage or pathway for people to to traverse, to come out of one of those spaces. And I think this is kind of like why at least in my communication around vaccination or in climate or any of these other things, I'm focusing on the group to protect them from the extreme view. So that goes into something that came up actually in the conference, which was the reason why I was on this side of the world, which was the Public Communication of Science and Technology conference. It was held in Rotterdam last week. And it came up quite often around this idea of building trust in science. We should trust in science. We should build trust in science. The trouble is that not all science is good. There was a scientific paper that linked autism to the measles vaccine. And yes, it was later retracted, but it was a scientific paper in the first place. So we are shifting our idea around trust to recognize that it's not really a binary, it's not on or off. And I think, at least in science communication research and literature, we are going to continue to work on this model and come up with something which is a little bit better. But something that was brought up in the conference a couple of times was these 4 groups around those who have blind trust to the point of like faith. It doesn't matter what the scientist says, because they're a scientist, I believe what they say. And you've got people who are at the other end, which is blind mistrust. Doesn't matter whether or not the scientist says, "Hi, my name is Tom," I'm not going to listen to them. But then you have these kind of like gradient in the middle, which is where the interesting space is. And there is, and yeah, I think there were like 4 or 5 talks on it in the conference, and there were some people put in 3 or 4 groups in this middle. I've simplified it for 2 in this instance, but we'll see where the field goes over the next little while. But these 2 in the middle here is around skeptical trust. I think I sit usually in most science fields around there. I'm ready to believe and trust scientific evidence. I don't believe it just because it's in the literature and it's published, though. I don't believe it just because you're an authority who knows something. I'm more likely to believe it because if I'm talking to the world expert in something, panda bears, they are the world expert in it. They've got a whole lot more information available to them than I do, and so it's foolish for me to like disagree with them just because I don't like what they say. But I'm not just going to take everything on face value. And then there's also people who have reasonable mistrust, where they were told something by someone who is an authority figure in the science space, but then it was shown to be wrong. They were misled. It's reasonable for them to mistrust scientists because they were told that this car's never going to break down, and it did. Or that the vaccine was safe, and then it hurt them or someone that was close to them, right? So we need to consider, when we're talking about audiences again, where they kind of fall in this space. Who are you trying to convince? I would argue the far ends are not worth the target and the energy and the effort. You're only going to hurt someone, and if your purpose is to feel good about yourself and hurt someone else, then great, go for it. I don't think that many of us in this room want to be doing that just for ourselves. We want to be doing it for trying to make some sort of common good, betterment, and then these middle areas is where we're probably going to be more effective. The skeptical trust is actually really massive in the vaccine movement around COVID. And so science communication research recognized that where we typically had like people who would get every vaccine would likely get a vaccine, and then you have people who are like really not going to get vaccines, that this additional group turned up because they were usually in the group of always getting vaccines, but they saw how fast the vaccine was produced in that less than 12 months. And so there was this, like, I'm ready to believe it, but it just, like, everything I've been told is that science research takes 12 years to get a drug out. So how did they do it this quick? It was a very different approach when you were trying to engage those people. They weren't anti-vaxxers. And so again, really thinking about where your audience is on the spectrum of how much they are ready to believe you. I am going to skip across over these parts because this was a different talk. So I'm going to kind of wrap there, because I think that works out time-wise. It does, yeah. With these kind of 5 key ideas, which I hope I've kind of articulated through the last hour. The facts themselves aren't what convince people, but it's essential that you don't ruin your own messaging by being sloppy with your work, by including falsehood. The community is actually everything to keeping someone with you or engaging with you. And if you're asking them to leave a community, we need to think about what's the warm and happy, safe space that they're going to be moving into and how to foster them in that new space. Inoculate, I should have changed that word. Protect those people who are exposed. So those people who are surrounding the people who are spreading misinformation or disinformation, they're the ones who need access to be able to say, I feel as though this is not right, and they just need the extra bit of confidence from others to say, oh, actually, no, I know that this isn't right, I'm going to dismiss this idea. Check your own bias, we all have it. Blindly trusting in science just because it's science is not a healthy place to be. And fundamentally, have purpose for why you're doing the communication. Without that purpose, you don't have an audience, you don't have who's speaking, you don't have a message. And I would implore you, beg you for that purpose to be an ethical one. Do it for good. With that, I am going to show you a kookaburra, which is one of my favourite Australian birds. It's a laughing kookaburra. Kookaburra actually comes from an Aboriginal word, one of the many cultures of the Aboriginal people. And it's kookaburra, that's the sound that the kookaburra makes. I love them. I used to be woken up by them at 8 o'clock in the morning in Brisbane, just in time for me to quickly get out of bed and go across the street to my morning lectures. This is how you can get in touch with me at a later point if you wish to, that's kind of what my climate impact has been so far on this trip. I've done a lot of walking. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Thank you so much, Claire. This has been a real big pleasure. And thank you for those people online. I know it's always hard to reach through the screen, but thank you for listening through. Thanks all.
So, as always, we'll have our questions. If you have a question, please come up here. If you're unable to come up, we will, of course, bring the microphone to you. While people are thinking of what to ask, I have lots of questions. Yeah. But I will just start with one, and I'll put some more in if there's room. So one thing that you mentioned is the importance of community. And you did like a mini survey here. And that's kind of when I've had the same experience when talking to other skeptics worldwide. What they love most about skepticism, and it's that feeling of community, feeling understood. Chris French, who's an amazing skeptical psychologist, says that skeptics are weird, and there's not that many of us, so there isn't much research about how we function. So we are very happy to kind of find people with the same weirdness that we have. So we absolutely adore our community. But to my question here, which one am I going to choose? So you were talking at the beginning of your talk about reaching the middle. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we get asked a lot, like, why are you doing this? Why are you putting out this content? Those people who disagree with you won't read it anyway. So we're always answer with that we're trying to reach the middle. But it's very, very difficult to define if the middle is pretty much 90% of the population. So how do you work with that? What are your tips on working with that?
Yeah, no, it's a really important. If you go to a science communication conference and you say that we were trying to do something to reach the public, everyone has a go at you. The general public doesn't exist. You'll quite often hear us talk about general publics or audiences. We make it plural to actually reference and recognise that that group of 98% or however much of the middle actually is a whole range of groups. My approach to try and deal and provide focus, because I think this is really the key. You could create a suite of communication activities that focus on every single individual subgroup. In fact, actually, how about we write a letter to each person individually? You know, that would be kind of getting to the point that you might need to go to be able to really target every single person. My approach is for us to think about who our primary, like the core primary audience is, and be quite specific. Define that persona, define that individual who you might be trying to reach out to. I'm after the. I mean, this is very common in media. So they'll quite often have a persona that they're putting breakfast TV on for. So there's a TV program in Australia called Sunrise, which is a breakfast news community TV program. The persona that they're making that program for is a lady by the name of Irene. She has 2 kids. One of them plays soccer or football. The other one doesn't. They know how old she is. They know which suburb she lives in. This Irene doesn't exist. It's completely fictional. But what they've got is they've got this person that they create their content to be perfect for. That's great. It's a wonderful way of being able to focus your attention to be able to achieve something. It's also a fantastic way of being able to exclude people, right? Because you make something which is perfect for here, and then you're not actually creating something that's accessible for all these other people who could benefit from it. So my approach to that is to do a 2-layered thing. You have your persona, your really primary target. You define that, but then you create quite strategically some secondary personas who need to have access as well. And if that secondary persona might be someone who, I don't know what it is here. In Australia, sign language is known as Auslan for people who are hard of hearing. So if that secondary persona uses Auslan, then you need to create a version of your product that is accessible to them, otherwise you're not meeting your groups, right? I don't think it's ever fair or reasonable for you to think about reaching every person in that middle group. If you're a social media person, like, what is your reach statistic that you get from your social media post? Is it actually 90% of the population, or is it only to 10,000 people or 300 people or whatever it might be? Who are those 300 people that you want to be reaching? And I think you can do that. There is never going to be something which is perfect for everyone. But while we try and be so general to be perfect for everyone, you're not good for anyone. So yeah, I don't know if does that answer your question?
I think that fully answers, yes. Is there any question from the audience, or not yet? Not yet, okay. So you can keep thinking. Is there any question online, or not yet? Okay. So one thing you said at the beginning, you were talking about the deficit model. When we think of that in the context of pedagogy, we see a huge shift in how authority is perceived. And we can also see that here within our skeptic movement, that when kind of the first wave of skeptic groups got started, they were the kind of authorities, the doctors with the glasses and the white coats and everything. And they were the people that the others sought out, were looking for the answers. Now we see that we are ones of many offering answers, and we have to make ourselves more likable, and we have to seek out the people we want to give the answers to. So when we look at that in the context of science communication, was there a similar shift that happened in like the 90s or early 2000s, or?
Yeah, and so the deficit model was so popular because it was everything that we did. It is on a journey of shifting through. So, like some of the early examples of what we've started to define or consider what science communication was the Faraday lectures, where you had the scientist who was, well, how about instead of me talking to all of my peers, let's invite some of the public in and they can listen to this lecture too. Well, let's call that science communication because I'm communicating science. It's still a very one-way street. It's still a very, it's a dissemination of information. I am throwing stuff out there. Just because we're saying that the deficit model isn't an effective way to get behaviour change doesn't mean that that's true 100% of the time, and also doesn't mean that it's not appropriate to use sometimes. It's largely the way that we, at least in the Australian system, the way that we train scientists is we sit in a lecture, we hear facts, we learn, and we check whether or not we've learnt them. The two-way conversation thing might come up in tutorials or workshops where there's a postdoc or a PhD student and they are discussing with the other students about a particular idea or whatever. It starts to create that two-way dialogue, and that helps build memory and build learning and whatever. But when I need to hear clarity around the fact that I need to evacuate a particular area of Australia because it's on fire and it's too late now to try and protect it, you need to get out to save yourself. I don't want the head of the fire service coming and pouring a cup of tea and sitting down with me and having a chat. I want them to tell me, I need you to get out. The point is, and that's very much the tell information thing. I need to be ready though to hear that. I need to be ready to listen and respect and appreciate that authority. And I think this is actually the really key thing, and it was something I was going to bring up about the Pint of Science stuff as well, which I forgot at the time. We shifted our purpose away from people learning a little bit of science to people appreciating science. We didn't care about whether or not someone learnt more chemistry because they came to our pub event. We just wanted them to know that a chemist existed. And they spent a very long time finding out this little piece of information. And so if you're after another piece of information about chemistry, maybe go to a chemist because they might know, right? So I think it depends on when and why. You still need that clear information telling to happen, but also that only exists because we already trust, we already believe, we already engage, we already appreciate those people. Yeah.
So speaking of trust, one thing you mentioned towards the end was about blind mistrust being caused by science letting someone down, or the claim that someone has made about science letting someone down, that they feel betrayed by a scientist or by a scientific claim. What we come across a lot is that people assume that they have been they have been let down by science, that science had lied to them, when in reality they've made a correlation into a causality, for example, with the vaccines autism issue. So how do you approach people who have blind mistrust based on an incorrect assumption, not on actually being let down?
Very carefully. Yeah, so I do want to just very quickly say that I think that there's a lot of like reasonable mistrust, which is kind of being established by this case. I think blind mistrust goes a little bit further than that, and that's still very, very hard. It's like that's super hard to deal with. That's where they found their community, that's where they found their people, their tribe, and they're not going to leave that tribe because that's not going to work. Those people who think they have a reasonable mistrust of science, I think you do need to be very careful because you have landmines, barriers all over the place that can immediately turn off a dialogue or a conversation to be able to happen, right? If I am talking to someone who feels as though that the vaccine that they gave their child is what led to their child's autism, because it happens to be at that time, I won't go into any of that, but talking to them about vaccines is not the way to go, because they turn off the same way with the polar bear or whatever it might be. But starting to engage with them on things that they do believe and that they do engage with or they do understand is. And so you can have a discussion with someone around causality and correlation, but not talk about vaccines at all. And get them to thoroughly understand, ready to listen to, ready to believe that particular concept, and then allow them to self-discover and support them while they do it. Because while they self-discover, they're going to find out stuff about them that's going to make them feel very, very vulnerable. They're going to hurt. They're going to want to back away, and you need to allow them to back away, but then also still be there to be able to help them on the next time, right? So I think, yeah, in a word, carefully, but not by hitting it head on. The hitting it head on is useful in the protecting the others that are around, right? I'm not saying that it's not. It does have a purpose, but it's not to try and protect the individual that I'm speaking to who's in that space. It's making sure that the others are, yeah, and perhaps even like pushing that person further away for the purpose of saying, hey, come join us on our side. And that's where it gets a little bit icky for me, at least, around that ethical purpose of why you're going about it, communicating in a certain way. Yeah.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you for the great lecture. I'm curious about the turn off words, like the picture of the polar bear and herd immunity. So is it like the problem is to say herd immunity, like the phrase, like the use of words, or is it like the whole topic of herd immunity is something that causes people to disengage from the content?
It's the phrase. It's literally the words, or the picture, or what it might be. So in that documentary, they have an entire section of the documentary that explains what herd immunity is, and they did the same like test of the people in the room. None of them turned off and listened to the whole thing, because they didn't use the word herd immunity. Okay. Right? So you can engage in a topic and you can discuss it, and it's a trick that I used to like doing a little bit, where you'd be like saying, oh yeah, and then I can explain to you this, you with me, and that's what we call blah, and that's when you see their mind go and they disengage from you and they never talk to you again, right? But so yeah, it's literally the phrase, it's literally the picture, it's literally the whatever has been branded as the thing. I would argue that we have this same issue across in other areas as well. Let's say that BP, the oil company, came out with the most effective solar panels tomorrow and was going to provide them to the world for free. Because it's got their brand on it, there's a lot of people who are going to say, hang on, there's something wrong with this. This doesn't feel right. I'm not going to accept this from you. So this is true in our own case, and this is why I'm kind of saying about checking your own bias as well, because we do need to be careful of, you know, if we want to think of ourselves as being more open-minded and ready to listen to evidence and what have you, we need to recognise that everything I was talking about here does apply to us. It's just you probably don't realise where it does. But yeah, it's literally the word. You might have a sub-company of BP that does this and we go, oh, hang on, they're amazing. Yeah, anyway.
Can I do one more? So you mentioned like that the target can be like the network of someone who's been misled and spreads the disinformation. It reminds me of this circular inoculation. I think that was the strategy for for the smallpox that managed to eradicate the disease. So would that mean that arguing with people on the internet, like under the articles on Facebook and there, is that the way to reach that audience? To
do you like arguing with people on the internet?
Not in particular.
Really? Okay. So then I'll say no to give you an off, so you don't have to do it. No. The answer is kind of. Yes, it works. We know from, well, okay, sorry, I'll roll back a little bit. There was an idea that if you argued with someone about a piece of misinformation, let's use the autism and measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine, specifically those two, that link. If you find someone who's on the internet speaking about it and you argue with them about it, that you can actually increase the perception of that being a valid idea. This is out of date ideas at the moment. So and on the surface it seems as though that's a reasonable thing. Let's say you're scrolling on Facebook and you see someone say that, hey, vaccines cause autism, and then you see that the Australian Academy of Science commented on that post saying, this isn't right, and you saw that while you were scrolling, and how fast did you stay on that post? Facebook considers if you spend more than 3 seconds looking at a post that you've engaged with that post. That's because that's how long you're normally around about 2.8 seconds is how long it takes for the dopamine release for you to go, oh, I want to go again. Oh, I want to go again. Give me more of this drug. You've only seen that logo for a couple of seconds. 3 weeks later, you see another post around vaccines causing autism, and you go, hang on, I remember the Australian Academy of Science saying something about that. That must be true. Which is the fear around it, right? And so we stopped doing it, and we started telling people, don't argue with people on the internet. We then did the research, and we found out actually arguing with people on the internet doesn't increase the validity of the idea. We now have the empirical proof to show that doesn't hold. It was a nice idea, but we need to be able to let go of that idea because the evidence now shows us that that's actually not true. It is actually useful to call out an idea and say, actually, no, this isn't backed up. The question, though, and the challenge that I would be giving you if you were on the internet getting into a discussion in the comments or arguing with someone about stuff, is what your purpose or effect of doing that is. If you personally, on your personal Facebook page, personal Facebook account, comment on this particular piece of information, and there's someone who you're a friend with or you engage with quite frequently on Facebook, then the algorithm's going to connect them to the piece of content you're now commenting on. So you're now exposing that piece of content to whoever it is who's within your network, right? And so there is actually an additional risk here where maybe in that case it's not the right place for you to be engaging.
I see. We don't want to reinforce the algorithm to spread the misconception. Yeah. So, but what we could do is we could argue only with the people who spread disinformation under articles that propagate the correct scientific information. So, for example,
so I would be, and as a person who used to run a social media account of the Australian Academy of Science, the biggest thing you could do would be to comment on my video to be able to improve its reach, right? And shift that balance of actually, no, the people who believe this thing are also engaging in it. So I would be challenging you rather than just arguing against the naysayer who comments on the piece of content which is true, but also to do the positive comment as well.
Thank you.
And that's actually a really effective way of being able to engage with or make some difference in that particular algorithm space. I don't know what the deal is with Twitter at the moment, but it was going down the same path, and I would say that it's going to probably be the same. Thank you. A little gift for me? Yes. Thank you so much.
Will you be at 12 May in Prague?
12 May?
12.
Probably not. Probably not.
Because there will be a special show giving prizes for paranormal persons. So.
Well, if I am around on the 12th of May, then I might come along.
I'll explain after we finish the streaming. I will explain more about it, definitely.
Thank
yes.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, if there's no questions online and no questions from the audience, I would like to thank you again, Tom, for coming and giving us this talk. It's very important to hear different perspectives on what we do and to be better and to learn from each other, as is our community. That's the point of our community. So thank you for honoring us with your presence. And we wish to see you again sometime soon in Prague, or maybe at another conference event that has something to do with science and skepticism.
Yes, I'm so super keen. I'll be back to your beautiful country and your beautiful city, and the invitation goes out to any of you as well to come to Australia. I know it's a bit far, but maybe come on the weekend. It'll be, it's pretty cool. Escape your winter and come to actually, it's probably the worst time to come, because it's really, really hot. So anyway, thank you so much. I had a pleasure being here. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.